The autumn rain drummed against the terracotta tiles of the abandoned estate, each drop echoing through the hollow rooms like accusations. Miguel Herrera stood in the doorway of his late uncle's study, water dripping from his worn jacket onto floors that had once gleamed with wealth. The scandal at Banco Santillana had stripped him of everything, his position, his reputation, his future. Now, at 34, he was reduced to sorting through the belongings of a man he barely knew, hoping to find something, anything, that might salvage his ruined life. The estate sprawled across the hills outside Salamanca, its stone walls weathered by centuries of Spanish winters. Uncle Tomas had been the family's black sheep, a mystic who collected strange books and stranger friends. Miguel's father had always whispered about Tomas with a mixture of shame and fear, crossing himself whenever the old man's name arose in conversation. Miguel pulled his jacket tighter and stepped into the study. Dust motes danced in the gray light filtering through cracked windows. The walls were lined with books in languages he couldn't identify, their spines adorned with symbols that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface scarred by decades of use. It was there, beneath a stack of yellowed correspondence, that Miguel found it. The manuscript was bound in leather so dark it seemed to absorb light. The cover bore no title, only a symbol that resembled a tree with roots that spiraled into infinity. The leather felt warm to the touch, almost alive, and when Miguel opened it, the pages released a scent like rich earth after rain. El final ya está vivido, the end is already lived. The title was written in elegant script across the first page, followed by a subtitle that made Miguel's breath catch, a testament of true abundance. He should have closed it then, should have thrown it on the pile destined for the fire. Instead, he found himself reading, drawn by words that seemed to address his desperation directly. Wealth is not earned through toil, brother. Wealth is not accumulated through cunning. Wealth is a state of being that exists beyond the physical realm, waiting to be summoned through perfect faith, boundless gratitude, and absolute detachment from outcome. The manuscript outlined a practice both simple and profound. The seeker must plant a seed, any seed, in consecrated ground while visualizing themselves in a state of complete abundance. Each day they must tend this seed not with water alone, but with affirmations of gratitude, spoken aloud as if the wealth had already manifested. The key was detachment. One must believe absolutely while caring nothing for the result. The earth responds to consciousness, the text explained. The seed planted with proper intention becomes a conduit between the inner realm of infinite abundance and the outer world of form. As above, so below. As within, so without. Miguel laughed bitterly. After 6 months of fruitless job applications and mounting debt, even mystical nonsense seemed worth trying. What did he have to lose? The estate's orchard stretched behind the main house, rows of ancient olive trees twisted by wind and time. Miguel chose a spot at the center, where the soil seemed richest, darkest. From his pocket, he pulled an orange seed he'd saved from lunch, his only meal that day. Following the manuscript's instructions, he dug a small hole with his bare hands, feeling the earth beneath his fingernails. He placed the seed gently in the depression, then covered it while speaking the words the text prescribed. I am grateful for the abundance that flows to me now. I am grateful for the wealth that is already mine. I release all attachment to outcome and trust in the infinite supply. The ritual felt foolish, but something stirred in his chest as he spoke, a warmth he hadn't felt since before the scandal. He repeated the affirmations 3 times, as instructed, then walked back to the house. That night, Miguel dreamed of golden light. The morning brought unexpected news. Senora Martinez, who owned the small pension where Miguel was staying, knocked on his door with an envelope that had arrived by messenger. From a lawyer in Madrid, she said, her weathered face creased with curiosity. Fancy paper. Miguel tore open the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a check for 3,000 euros, a settlement from a class-action lawsuit he'd forgotten joining years earlier. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to keep him afloat for another month. Coincidence, surely. But that evening Miguel found himself back in the orchard, kneeling beside the spot where he'd planted the seed. In the fading light he could swear he saw a tiny green shoot pushing through the earth, impossible after just one day. He performed the ritual again, speaking the words with growing conviction. This time, the warmth in his chest spread outward, tingling through his limbs like electricity. When he finished, the air around him seemed to shimmer with possibility. Over the following days, the pattern continued. Small windfalls arrived like clockwork, a forgotten savings account discovered by his bank, a tax refund processed early, a neighbor who insisted on paying him to clear dead branches from their property. Each morning brought new growth in the orchard, the shoot becoming a sapling with unnatural speed, its leaves an unusual golden green that seemed to glow in certain light. By the end of the first week, Miguel began to notice other changes. His reflection in the bathroom mirror looked different. Not dramatically so, but his clothes appeared finer somehow, his posture more confident. When he looked down at himself, he still wore the same worn shirts and frayed trousers, but the mirror showed silk and fine wool. He told himself it was a trick of the light, nothing more. The second week brought more substantial changes. Don Carlos, who owned the largest vineyard in the region, approached Miguel with an offer to manage his accounts. It was simple bookkeeping work, but it paid well, too well for someone with Miguel's tarnished reputation. "You have an honest face," Don Carlos said, shaking Miguel's hand with surprising warmth. "I trust you." That night, Miguel's gratitude ritual took on new fervor. The sapling in the orchard had grown impossibly tall, its branches reaching toward the stars. In the darkness, its golden leaves seemed to pulse with their own light, and Miguel swore he could hear whispers carried on the evening wind. Gratitude is the magnet. Persist, persist. He should have been alarmed. Instead, he felt chosen, special. The manuscript had promised abundance, and abundance was flowing to him like water from a spring. What did it matter if the source was unconventional? By the third week, Miguel's financial situation had transformed completely. Don Carlos had recommended him to other wealthy landowners, and suddenly he found himself managing multiple estates, earning more in a week than he'd made in months at the bank. The work was simple, almost trivial, reviewing accounts, organizing ledgers, yet his clients treated him with deference that bordered on reverence. But with each success, Miguel noticed troubling patterns. Senora Martinez, who had been so kind to him, began to struggle. Her pension lost guests inexplicably. Bills arrived that she couldn't pay. The postman mentioned that several businesses in town were failing, their owners speaking of sudden reversals of fortune. Miguel tried to dismiss these observations as coincidence, but the manuscript words echoed in his mind. True abundance requires balance. The universe abhors a vacuum. As wealth flows to you, it must flow from somewhere. The tree in the orchard continued its impossible growth. Now as tall as the surrounding olives despite being planted less than a month ago, its trunk had developed strange patterns, whorls and spirals that reminded Miguel of fingerprints. The golden fruit it bore was beautiful but wrong somehow, too perfect, too luminous. When he touched one, it felt warm, pulsing with something that might have been a heartbeat. On a moonless night, Miguel's curiosity finally overcame his caution. He plucked one of the golden fruits and bit into it. The taste was indescribable. Honey and copper, sunshine and shadow. But as the juice ran down his chin, he realized it wasn't juice at all. It was blood, thick and dark, leaving his lips stained crimson. He spat the fruit out and stumbled backward, but the tree's whispers followed him. Do not waste the gift. Do not waste the sacrifice. Sleep eluded him that night. When he finally dozed near dawn, he dreamed of faces in the earth, dozens of them, half-formed and pleading, their mouths opening and closing silently. He woke to find his pillow stained with dirt, though he couldn't remember how it had gotten there. The manuscript revealed more of its secrets as Miguel delved deeper into its pages. He learned that he wasn't first to follow its teachings. The book spoke of others, the cultivators of abundance, who had achieved perfect manifestation. Their names were listed in flowing script: Don Eduardo de Salamanca, Dona Isabel Moreno, Padre Francisco Velázquez. Miguel recognized some of the names from local history. They had been wealthy aristocrats and powerful clerics who had vanished mysteriously in the early 1900s, leaving behind vast fortunes that had never been claimed. The official records spoke of sudden departures, journeys abroad that had no destinations. But the manuscript told a different story. They achieved the ultimate synthesis, it explained. They became abundance itself, transcending the crude divisions between inner and outer, between self and source. The illustrations accompanying these passages were disturbing. They showed figures that were only partially human, beings of gold leaf and bone, their eyes hollow, their mouths frozen in expressions of eternal gratitude. Their roots extended deep into the earth, feeding on something Miguel couldn't identify but instinctively feared. His own transformation accelerated. The glow that had begun as a subtle warmth now emanated from his skin at night, attracting clouds of moths and stranger insects that clicked and chittered in languages he almost understood. His reflection had become completely divorced from reality. The mirror showed him dressed in expensive suits, surrounded by luxury, while his actual body remained unchanged. But it was the effect on others that truly alarmed him. Everyone who spent time in his presence began to suffer reversals. Don Carlos lost 2 major contracts the day after their longest meeting. The baker who had started giving Miguel free pastries found her shop infested with rats that appeared overnight. The pharmacist, who had waived charges for Miguel's headache medication, discovered that his insurance had been canceled due to a clerical error that would take months to resolve. Miguel began to understand the truth with mounting horror. His abundance wasn't being created from nothing, it was being transferred. Every euro that flowed to him was being drained from someone else, every stroke of luck balanced by another's misfortune. He was becoming a parasite, feeding on the prosperity of everyone around him. Yet he couldn't stop. The ritual had become compulsive, necessary. Each evening found him in the orchard, speaking his affirmations to the impossible tree, feeling the addictive rush of gratitude and manifestation. The manuscript had warned of this too, in passages he'd initially skipped. The practice, once begun with pure intent, creates its own momentum. The seeker becomes the seed, the soil, and the harvest. Cessation becomes impossible, for to cease is to deny one's own abundance, and such denial destroys the vessel. The storm arrived on a Thursday night in November, howling across the Castilian plains with unprecedented fury. Miguel found himself drawn to the orchard despite the danger, the tree's whispers audible even above the wind. Lightning illuminated the scene in stark, terrible detail. The tree had grown monstrous. Its trunk was now thick as a cathedral pillar, its branches reaching toward the storm clouds like grasping fingers. But it was the roots that made Miguel's blood freeze. They had emerged from the earth, twisted and pale, and wrapped around objects Miguel hadn't seen before. Objects that looked disturbingly like human remains. As lightning flashed again, he saw them clearly. Dozens of figures half buried in the soil, their forms composed of yellowed bone and tattered gold leaf. Their faces were turned upward, mouths open in silent screams or eternal gratitudes, Miguel couldn't tell which. Their eye sockets were filled with dirt and growing things, small plants that pulsed with the same golden light as the tree. These were the cultivators of abundance. They had achieved their ultimate synthesis, becoming one with the source of their wealth. They had transcended the need for physical form, transforming into eternal vessels of manifestation, and eternal prisoners of their own gratitude. One of the figures turned its hollow gaze toward Miguel, and he heard its voice carried on the wind. "Join us, brother. Join us in perfect abundance. No more fear, no more need, only endless gratitude, endless flow." Miguel stumbled backward, but the tree's roots writhed toward him like seeking tentacles. He ran toward the house, the manuscript's final pages burning in his memory. He had found them that afternoon, hidden beneath what had seemed like blank end papers. The final cultivation cannot be reversed once begun. The seeker who has tasted true abundance can never return to scarcity. They must choose, burn the source and accept spiritual poverty, or surrender completely and become abundance itself. Choose wisely, for there is no middle path. In the estate's study, Miguel's hands shook as he reread the manuscript's final instructions. The storm raged outside, and he could feel the tree calling to him, its whispers penetrating the stone walls like roots through soil. His reflection in the window showed him clothed in robes of gold, crowned with leaves that dripped prosperity, but when he looked down at his actual body, he saw the first signs of the transformation. His fingertips were turning yellow, not with illness, but with something that looked like metallic paint. The change was spreading slowly up his hands, and where it touched, his skin felt different, harder, more brittle, but also warmer. The glow that had begun weeks ago was intensifying, and he could see veins of light pulsing beneath his surface, like liquid gold flowing through his bloodstream. The manuscript offered 2 paths forward. The first required him to burn the book itself, along with any artifacts of the cultivation practice. This would sever his connection to the abundance field, but leave him spiritually empty, not just poor in material terms, but incapable of experiencing joy, hope, or satisfaction ever again. He would live, but as a hollow vessel, immune to both pleasure and pain. The second path was surrender, complete integration with the abundance matrix, joining the cultivators in their eternal harvest. He would become a node in their network, feeding the cycle with his consciousness while experiencing infinite gratitude and unlimited prosperity. His physical form would transform into something more durable, more beautiful, more perfect than mere human flesh. He would never want for anything again, because he would become want itself, desire given form, manifestation incarnate. Outside, the golden tree pulsed with increasing urgency. Miguel could feel it pulling at something deep in his chest, the same warmth he'd experienced during his first ritual now grown into a burning need. The transformation wasn't optional anymore. It was happening whether he chose it or not. The only question was whether he would embrace it or fight it. He thought of Senora Martinez, now unable to pay her heating bills as winter approached. He thought of the baker closing her shop because the rat infestation had driven away all her customers. He thought of Don Carlos, drinking himself into despair as his vineyard faced foreclosure. All of them had suffered so that Miguel could prosper, their abundance flowing to him through channels he'd never understood but had eagerly exploited. The manuscript had lied about one thing. Wealth wasn't summoned from nothing. It was harvested from human misery, concentrated and refined until it became too potent for normal flesh to contain. The cultivators weren't blessed. They were cursed with a prosperity so pure it had consumed their humanity entirely. Miguel's hands continued their transformation, the golden tinge creeping past his wrists toward his elbows. Soon it would reach his heart, and then the choice would be made for him. He would join the eternal harvest whether he willed it or not. Lightning crashed outside, and in its brilliant illumination, Miguel saw something that made his decision for him. Reflected in the study's windows were faces, not his own golden-crowned visage, but the faces of everyone whose abundance he had stolen. They pressed against the glass like drowning souls, their expressions filled with loss and confusion, their eyes asking the question he'd been avoiding. Why did our prosperity have to die so yours could live? Miguel's transformation accelerated as he made his choice. The golden discoloration now covered his arms to the shoulders, and he could feel his bones becoming hollow yet stronger, like those of a bird designed for eternal flight. His teeth had sharpened into precious metal points, and when he smiled, light spilled from his mouth like liquid sunshine. But instead of surrendering to the blissful integration the manuscript promised, Miguel fought. He grabbed the leather-bound book and stumbled toward the fireplace, his movements growing awkward as his transformed limbs struggled to obey his purely human intentions. The tree's whispers became screams of protest, and through the windows he could see its branches lashing violently against the storm. Do not waste the gift. Do not waste the sacrifice. The voices weren't coming from the tree alone now. They poured from the earth itself, from the bones of the cultivators who had made this choice before him. They had surrendered to abundance and achieved a kind of immortality, but it was an immortality of hunger, of endless consumption, of gratitude so pure it had become indistinguishable from greed. Miguel threw the manuscript into the fireplace. The ancient leather caught immediately, burning with flames that shifted through every color of gold and amber. As it burned, he felt something tearing inside his chest, as if vital organs were being ripped away. The golden transformation reversed itself violently, his metallic skin cracking and peeling like old paint, revealing raw flesh beneath. The pain was extraordinary, not just physical but spiritual, the agony of voluntary poverty, of choosing limitation over infinite possibility. Every euro he'd gained through the cultivation vanished from his account simultaneously. Every contact who had offered him work forgot his name in the same instant. Every stroke of luck reversed itself like a film played backward, but more than his wealth disappeared. Miguel felt his capacity for hope drain away like water from a broken vessel. The manuscript had warned that burning the abundance connection would leave him spiritually barren, and it was true. As the fire consumed the final pages, Miguel realized he would never again experience genuine joy, satisfaction, or anticipation. He had traded his potential for transcendence in exchange for his humanity, and humanity, it seemed, was capable of great suffering, but very little else. Outside, the tree's screams reached a crescendo before cutting off abruptly. Through the window, Miguel watched it collapse in on itself, its golden leaves turning black and brittle, its monstrous trunk cracking down the center. The storm intensified momentarily, then ceased entirely, leaving an unnaturally quiet night in its wake. The faces of the cultivators appeared one final time in the settling smoke, their expressions unreadable. Some seemed grateful for their release. Others appeared furious at being denied their newest addition. Then they faded, and Miguel was alone with the dying fire and his transformed understanding of abundance. 6 months later, Miguel Herrera worked as a night janitor in a Salamanca office building. The pay was minimal, the work tedious, and his coworkers regarded him as just another man who'd fallen on hard times, which was true as far as it went. He lived in a cramped studio apartment, ate simple meals, and owned nothing of value. But he was alive, and he was free. The spiritual emptiness the manuscript had warned of was real and constant. Miguel experienced life in muted tones, finding no pleasure in food, music, or human companionship. Beautiful sunsets looked gray to him, laughter sounded hollow, Even physical pain registered as mere sensation rather than genuine suffering. He existed in a state of profound numbness that would last until his natural death. Yet sometimes, in the early hours of morning as he mopped empty hallways, Miguel caught glimpses of something the cultivators had lost forever. He would see a young couple, walking past the building's windows, holding hands and planning their future together, and though he felt nothing himself, he could recognize the authentic wealth they carried, the abundance of connection, hope, and genuine affection that no ritual could manufacture or steal. The estate outside Salamanca stood empty now, its orchard returning to natural wildness. Where the impossible tree had stood, only a circle of unusually fertile soil remained, sprouting ordinary wildflowers that bloomed and died according to natural seasons. Local historians noted that several missing persons cases from the early 1900s had been mysteriously resolved, with death certificates issued posthumously based on newly discovered evidence. Miguel never returned to visit, but he kept one memento from his time there, a single orange seed, unremarkable and ordinary, which he carried in his pocket as a reminder. Wealth, he had learned, was not something that could be summoned, stolen, or manifested through gratitude alone. True abundance had to be earned through patience, work, and genuine service to others. And even then, it could never be permanent, never be possessed, only experienced in fleeting moments of connection and meaning. The seed remained unplanted, a promise of natural growth that would take its own time, require its own seasons, and produce only what it was genuinely capable of producing. Sometimes Miguel would roll it between his fingers and remember what it felt like to want something desperately enough to sacrifice everything else for it. But he never planted it. He had learned the difference between cultivation and consumption, between growing something real and feeding off the reality others had built. The lesson had cost him everything, his wealth, his hope, his capacity for joy, but it had saved his soul. In the end, Miguel had chosen to remain human rather than become abundance itself. And in a world where so many were willing to sacrifice their humanity for prosperity, that choice was perhaps the rarest form of wealth of all. He walked through his empty life carrying that one small seed, never planting it, never throwing it away. A man who had touched infinite possibility and chosen finite reality instead, finding in that choice not happiness, but something more valuable, the knowledge that he was still himself, still capable of moral decisions, still human enough to recognize the difference between authentic growth and beautiful corruption. The seed remained dormant in his pocket, waiting for a gardener who understood that true cultivation required not just faith and gratitude, but patience, humility, and the wisdom to accept that some forms of abundance come only to those who seek to possess them completely. Outside his window, the natural world continued its ancient cycles of growth and decay, abundance and scarcity, each season bringing its own gifts to those patient enough to receive them without trying to control their source. And Miguel, hollow but free, continued his quiet work in the margins of other people's dreams, carrying his unplanted seed through the ordinary miracle of each unremarkable day.